We are an organization that supports and encourages the careers of emerging documentary film editors. For 9 years, we're going into our 9th year, and we've been awarding one fellowship a year to an talented emerging documentary editor. We give them mentorship, and we send them to film festivals and give them a variety of benefits, including a Doc NYC Pro Pass. Thank you, Doc NYC. And this year we started a new program, Diversity in the Edit Room program, and we're mentoring 29, again, emerging editors who show talent and promise, who come from a variety of backgrounds and experiences. And so we're really happy to be here. Real quick, a little bit about Karen Schmeer. She was one of the best editors of her generation. She worked on Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control and Fog of War, Mr. Death. Those movies were with Errol Morris. She also edited The Same River twice, Sergio. She won the editing award at Sundance the year Sergio played. And in 2010, she was killed on the Upper West Side by a hit-and-run driver. So I and a few of her friends got together, and we started this fellowship in her honor, her memory. She had a really giving, sharing spirit, and was really good about promoting assistant editors and referring them to jobs that people may otherwise have thought they weren't qualified for on paper, but she saw something in them and thought that they were worthy of promotion. So with that in mind, we're here to talk about the joys of editing, documentary editing. I'll introduce our panel. I've taken bios. They may not be entirely updated from the internet, and made some edits, so forgive me if I got anything wrong here. I'm going to start with Bob Eisenhardt, to my right. Bob is a 3-time Emmy Award winner and Oscar nominee. He has over 60 films to his credit. He's edited documentaries for Barbara Koppel, Maisels Films, Susan Fromke, Matt Tyrnauer, Mark Levin, David Grubin, and Alex Gibney. His films include Wagner's Dream, Valentino, the Last Emperor, Dixie Chicks, Shut Up and Sing, and Meru. And he's here today to talk about Free Solo. Next to him is Erin Casper. Erin's editing credits include American Promise, which won the 2013 Sundance Special Jury Award. She'll be showing a clip from that today. She also edited The Last Season, The New Black, and Our School. Her most, I guess her 2 recent films, this is not her most recent film anymore, so thus my disclaimer from the internet. She edited Risk, directed by Laura Poitras, and she recently edited Roll, Red, Roll. That's why we have it on the screen behind me. And she also cuts short form and episodic nonfiction in locations such as Vanity Fair, Field of Vision, New York Times OpDocs, and The Intercept. And Erin was our inaugural recipient of the Karen Schmeer Film Editing Fellowship back in 2011. Next to her is Carla Gutierrez. She edited the Oscar-nominated film La Corona for HBO, the Emmy-nominated documentary Reportero. She cut When Two Worlds Collide, which won an award at Sundance in 2016. And her most recent film is RBG, which she'll be showing a clip from today. And she'll be giving us an update on RBG's health. What happened? She fell a few days ago and broke 3 ribs? Okay, so we'll get an update on that. And Carla's also been a creative advisor for the Sundance Edit Lab and a mentor for Firelight Producers Lab. And next to Carla is Katharine Garrison. Katharine is an award-winning producer and editor. She's created stories for PBS, NBA, IFC, AMC, and Sundance Channel. And she co-edited an Emmy Award-nominated short documentary and produced and edited for the series, for the multiple Emmy Award-winning series Mad Men, Walking Dead, The Killing, and Rubicon. Katharine has worked in most genres, and long-form documentary remains her one true love. And she's here today to talk about United Skates. So there we go. Now let's get started. Before we get to the clips, I'd like to start with a short question, just so we meet all of our panelists at the beginning. So we're lucky today to have 4 people who have a range of experience. as I said, Bob's got 60 movies under his belt, and Katharine has just edited her first feature. So I'm excited that we get to talk about a range of experience levels and experiences. I said experiences twice. So I'm going to start with a question for Bob. You've cut all these movies. Please tell me it gets easier.
Well, I hate to be discouraging to anyone out there who's just getting into the editing business, but no. I mean, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm thick or something. I don't know. It doesn't get easier for me. And maybe there's a good part to that, which is you kind of raise the bar each time. You expect a little bit more out of yourself, hopefully more out of the film. So that's the good side of it. Or maybe you just haven't learned enough along the way. I don't know.
So do you still have a period at the beginning of each project where you're starting to watch the footage and get into the project and wondering, how am I going to do this?
Yes, very much so. That's the same. The difference is that you can tell yourself, oh, I've done this before and it worked out, so maybe I'll be okay.
Yeah,
I don't think that's wisdom. I think that's just kind of experience.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Carla and Erin, and it's the same question. As you're moving into your, let's say, mid-career of editing and editing more films, are you starting to get more of a sense of your own style? Editors get hired to work on a variety of different projects. They're not a director coming into a project with a style and the way they want a film to be. Sometimes editors feel like, oh, I just get hired and I fit my style to what the director wants. Are you finding that's true, or are you finding that you do have a certain style and maybe you get hired for that?
I think well, first of all, I want to say thank God to hear you say that. It makes me feel so much better, and also just like, oh no. But I think it's a little bit of both. I think I've found that almost every editor I know I can recognize their signature or their key, in their work. I think that that's true for me as well, but also I've worked with a range of directors where, they're first-time filmmakers, they're very established filmmakers, and in the case of the latter, I have, so much familiarity with really experienced directors, and I think that kind of, I have tended to edit toward that, but I still think that the way that I think about material and approach material is still kind of embedded in my work. Like, it's just kind of inescapable.
Yeah, I would agree that I can see, I'm kind of like a fan of seeing other editors with a lot of experienced material, and I follow them. I become a bit of a stalker and watch your film maybe twice. Bob, I've seen some of your films 3 times. But I can see the signature that other people have, and I'm starting to see, as I'm editing more films, I'm starting to see that I also have some kind of a touch and a signature that you can see in other films. But I think it's more about process. Like, I'm finding my way in, I've tried things that haven't worked, and I'm finding a way of process that works for me. And also how to deal with collaboration, because, you're collaborating with very different personalities, with different experiences of directors, and people that are looking for something different sometimes in their film. And that collaboration is really important in, pushing me outside of my comfort zone, because sometimes, I'm becoming too familiar with the process that has worked for me, and it is that great collaboration that makes me try new things or makes me look at the film or the material in new ways, and that's always very exciting and new in every film.
Thank you. Katharine, my question for you is, you have done a lot of work for television, for the small screen or for the internet, and now you've cut this feature film that was intended for festivals and theatrical release. While you were editing the feature film, were you approaching the material in any different way than you were cutting for the small screen?
Definitely. First off, thank you, Garret, and thanks, Doc NYC. I just wanted to say how honored I am to be on a panel with such veteran editors, having just edited my first feature documentary. But yeah, I would say the one commonality between all the different lengths I've edited is that I approach everything, whether it's 30 seconds or 5 minutes or 30 minutes, telling a story. So even if you're editing 30 seconds, you're still trying to find an arc. And it may be more of a rhythmic arc. It may be, I feel like film is very musical, and there's a huge musicality to that. So a lot of times when you're editing a promo, you might start with laying in a music bed, and that informs the edit. That is a commonality, but the difference, I would say, is that editing this feature and why I want to solely go into feature documentary editing and why I left the commercial world is just that there are so many more layers that you can build in. So while you have little narrative beats in a scene, they all add up to something greater. And there's a lot more. It's not just a 1-level, 2-level process. It's a 3-level process. So there's a lot more depth that can be communicated. And that's difficult. So I was grateful to hear, Bob, what you said, that we're not alone.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something we're going to cover several times today in the clips that we're showing. Sometimes it's easy to show a clip about a film and talk about the clip, but then we forget the overall picture. And structure is just so crucial to the success of a film. And changing one thing, making it longer or shorter here, or where we put it, has such an effect on the way the audience experiences the film. And we're going to talk about that today. In fact, as you were talking, we're going to start with a clip from United Skates from Katharine. And it's interesting hearing you talk about the musicality of the edit, because I think that this example that you've brought in really illustrates that. So this is from the opening of the film. Why don't you just tell us just a little bit about what the film's about? We don't have to talk about it too much since it's the beginning of the film.
For anyone that hasn't seen United Skates, this is a film about a subculture of roller skating in the African American community, a community that's been that gave birth to a lot of the early hip hop and rap artists that we're all familiar with, that got their start in the roller rinks. This is the opening of the film, and we can talk more about how we constructed it, because this scene, or a couple of scenes that open the film, I think were the 28th iteration of an open that we had edited. So.
So on a panel, getting your audience's attention, I think this does so many things well. It's great to see it in a theater. I saw it in a theater the first time and then watched it on my computer in preparation for the panel, but the quiet here as people are leaning in to pay attention is so effective. So talk about that. Also maybe talk about briefly some of the other ideas you guys had thought were going to work while you were working on the film and how you wound up to this.
Well, it's funny. I'm sitting here thinking the whole time as an editor, is the level correct up there? Is the level, like the technical brain going? We cut many, many different iterations of this open, and ultimately wound up coming back to it the very, very end of editing. So once we completed the rest of the film, and a lot of our struggles, my struggle editing this film, was that there was not a lot of verite footage. So a lot of the verite was built with voiceover and then people, not necessarily scenes that played out. So a lot of the editing process was cutting out stuff to try to not bang people over the head. So I think part of grabbing the audience's attention is, for me, a learning process of not banging people over the head, but like guiding them in. So we said, what if the most exciting thing about getting involved with this project for me was entering this world. And so how can we translate that amazing emotional experience of arriving at a rink late at night, in the middle of the night, and entering it, and the uncertainty that a lot of these skaters feel on the outside of the rink with the presence of police, and then what is that experience of actually going into the rink and entering it and feeling this sense of community and joy and love and self-expression. But how can you translate that into film? So we said, let's try to do it without any dialogue, without anybody telling you anything, and let's try to allow the audience to be that person going into the rink. So I don't know if we did it successfully, but that was the idea. Like, let's use sound design, music to build that so that there's a huge crescendo. and that people go, wow, I didn't know this world existed. Some people do, obviously, if there are any skaters in the audience, and that it's all over the United States. So that was.
How much work did you? Yeah. How much work did you do yourself or with your team before you went to your sound designer to build what we heard? Or can you talk about the sound design?
The sound, actually, most of the sound design, a lot of it was done in the edit room because there was no money for sound work, unfortunately. So we only had 2 weeks of sound design. The sound designers did do a lot of Foley, so a lot of the skating sounds that we got a whole bunch of LA skaters to come in to record Foley, and we played different clips for them, and they actually skated and did the moves that their friends in the film were doing to try to, create those sounds and make it really authentic. Because one of the things that's hard about sound design in a roller skating rink is that it's so loud. You can't have a verite scene really in a roller rink because the music's always blasting, and you have rights to that music, and there's crowds, and so a lot of the sound design had to be recreated, but we had 2 weeks, really, so the open, all of those sounds in the open were pretty much done, I'd say, in the edit room. But the skating sounds, once you got into the rink, were done in sound design.
Great, thank you. I have more questions, but unfortunately we have to move along to have time for some Q&A at the end, hopefully. Erin, let's go to you, since your clip is also from the beginning of American Promise. Can you talk about your approach to cutting this opening?
So this is a clip from right after the pre-title opening, and the film American Promise is about 2 African-American families who live in Brooklyn and send their oldest sons to Dalton, which is a private prep school in the Upper East Side in Manhattan. And both boys attend from kindergarten to 12th grade, the high school graduation, and the film was shot over a period of the entire 13 years. And the directors are Joe and Michelle, and they are one of the sets of parents of one of the boys, Idris, and and his best friend Shayon is the other boy. And I kind of want to talk more about the process of editing this film, but briefly. Since it was shot over such a long period of time, had a lot of people in the film, I want to say there was about 800 hours of footage to contend with in the entire 10-month edit. And so this was kind of one of the, just being so inundated by choice, this was, something that made it, basically. And it was a struggle to figure out where to start for a long time. And then I just wanted to sort of talk more about where we ended up and why.
Okay, and you worked with 2 other editors on the film, right?
Yes. So there were 2 other editors that edited this film, Mary Manhart and Andrew Seewoff. We worked together the entire time. And so there were just so many different iterations of the opening, of the entire structure, things that were constantly coming in and out. Our first cut, or our first assembly, if you could really call it, that was 32 hours long. So that's what I mean about the survivor. And so, it's just hard to really kind of know where to start. And I think when you have so much footage to contend with, and also you're at the beginning of your process, I think the instinct is to kind of just say everything sometimes, and it's a process of sort of just working backwards and simplifying and distilling, and in a way so you can introduce your characters in their world and get to know them, but finding that kind of balance and elegance is just so much of the process.
All right, let's see the clip. So can you talk a little bit about what we talked about earlier about the having some quiet scenes where we get to spend time with characters and how that effectively draws us in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, when I'm editing, it's like a process of teaching myself patience, and also maybe even asking for patience at the beginning of a film. Just any way to sort of invite the audience in and let them settle, and just, really kind of just take everything is on an as needed basis, really, in terms of information. And the reason why we ended up with this is because it's just very simple. The boys are going to school, and Idris walks up to Cheon's parents' house to ask for Cheon. So you know that he's asking for his friend. You know that this boy is his friend. He references his daddy, and Stacy, Cheon's mother, looks up and smiles and says hi. And you can hear Michelle behind the camera, so you know that the parents are filming. That's like a lot, actually, to establish that we needed to. That could have easily been in voiceover or tackled a million different ways, but it's all sort of just emanating from what you're watching and what's unfolding in the scene. And then I think in the back seat with the kids, with the boys, they are teasing each other, and they're talking about not being shy, and it's it's funny, and that's inviting. I think humor is a huge invitation to audiences too. It may not appear to be necessarily pushing the story forward, but you don't even realize that you're actually learning a lot and observing a lot. And there's a way of sort of maybe more naturally kind of getting your audience comfortable without throwing information at them. And then you see what their school is like, I never did egg tests in kindergarten, and I love just watching the kids run around and scream, it's alive. So with Mary and Andrew, we actually divided up the footage by grade. So there was kind of an inherent structure, and, so we all took grades and eras of footage and approached it, but then we were always constantly switching and editing and re-editing. And so, so it was just totally just this process where we were constantly switching and reshaping.
Can you talk briefly about Kim Roberts' idea that she mentioned about the arc of tolerance? So Kim Roberts is a talented editor. She cut Food, Inc., among many other films, Unrest, and she has an idea about the arc of tolerance.
I loved this idea. So Kim, I saw her on a panel in the spring, and she talked about this idea of the arc of tolerance and how, the threshold for tolerance and the audience's ability to take in information is actually very low in the beginning of a film. And then over time, it becomes greater and greater. And so she talked about how she always thinks about that in terms of how you're sort of meeting, doling out information. And there's also another really good, I guess, analogy that I heard, which is imagine that the beginning of your film is you're going to go on a hiking trip, and you're going to hike up a mountain. And when you are at the bottom of the mountain, you want your backpack to be light, and and then maybe you kind of gather more things as you go, but you don't want to start off with a heavy load, or else you're just going to get too tired from the beginning.
And by the end, you've eaten a lot of your food, the backpack's lighter. Also, the arc of tolerance idea, if we think of it as the arc towards the end of the film, don't stop giving me new information, right? If the film's coming towards the last third and I'm getting new characters, it starts to lose me. So I think it works at the beginning and the end. I think it's a great metaphor.
Could I just make a point about trust? For me, it's the ever-present challenge in the process of editing. And I haven't seen this in a long time, but it was great seeing it again. But it's very hard. I mean, it's very hard to put a scene together and that carries so much meaning just in verite alone. And after having edited 2 heavy interview and archival films, I'm cutting a verite film, and it's a big reminder that it's really easy to just immediately rely on just saying going to the voiceover from interviews and just saying what you want to say really quickly, explicitly. And so what you just showed us is so hard to have trust in the verite to be able to carry that meaning.
Yeah, and especially as you become used to the footage too, that's always a challenge. Is that you just become kind of, just you kind of can gloss over things after a while. So it's just so important to track your for me, it's just so important to track your first impressions always. So I have those as a reference point of like how it felt to watch things for the first time, because after like, I had probably too soon, I'm like, who cares? You know?
Yeah, do you have, you're going to say something about?
Oh yeah, in both these examples, it seemed to me that it was the mystery of it that drew you in, you know, and if you're the audience and you have to struggle, have to involve yourself by trying to understand what's going on, that's the grab, you know, that's what pulls you in. Being told things kind of pushes you away. It makes you lazy and feels like, well, they're just going to tell me stuff for an hour and a half, you know, and so I don't have to work for it. But in both of these things, you're kind of trying to figure things out, so it involves you in a way. And the humor is the other thing that I think is so welcome, you know, that this isn't going to be, and especially with docs, you know, this isn't going to be all serious, you know. We're going to have fun here.
Yeah.
Humor, going from, Katharine, do you have one more thing?
I just, on a very technical note, because, you know, I made the comment about the levels. When you find those initial moments, mark them, because sometimes you can't ever find that. You're like, where was that one smile that moved me on day one, and now we're 900 days in, and you could spend 3 days looking for that smile. So mark it. Be organized. Take it from someone who has not done that.
And mark it with how you felt too. Yeah, it's like not just good, bad, but like, you know, I always like say like I love this, or I cried, or you know, because then if I watch it again, you know, it just depends on the day. Like I might cry again or smile again, and then sometimes I'm like, who cares? Yeah.
All right, now we're going to move on to RBG and Carla's work on that film. So, you know, I hear about a film's going to be about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I feel it's going to have a lot of court cases, a lot of dry stuff, of course, a lot of archival elements. And but one of the lovely, surprising things about RBG that you discover pretty early on in the film is it's also a love story. So Carla's going to talk about how they crafted that and show a scene that illustrates that.
So the sequence that I'm going to show is the first time that RBG meets her husband, Marty, and that's a relationship that kind of plays out throughout the whole film. It comes in like around 7 minutes in the film, and it was something that the directors, and then when I started watching the footage, we knew that it was just going to be such an essential part of the film, and really, you know, play with the audience's like emotional strings and really connect with audiences. But we always thought of it, and also every part of the film, as a reflection of kind of what the vision and the goal of the message of the film was, which was, you know, to talk about her work for women's rights and also the limitations in her personal story. So this relationship really kind of reflected a true partnership that helped her, you know, fight the good fight for you know, women's empowerment. So yeah, let's take a look at it, and then we can talk more specific about it.
And one of the challenges that this clip addresses is you had all kinds of sources of footage, right? And you weren't quite sure how they were going to cut together.
Yeah. So this, and I'll talk a little bit more about this when we see it. But this was the first sequence that I edited in the film, and actually what you're going to see in the final film was pretty close to what we first cut. And it was also kind of our test run, because we knew that the film was going to be kind of a patchwork of a lot of tiny little pieces that we needed to put together in a coherent story. In the opening, we set up that we're going to see RBG in a lot of different events. So by the time we get to the sequence, you're kind of like familiar with this jumping around, you know, quite a bit of jumping around. So yes, and we can talk more about trust and building trust in the process from the sequence. The scene kind of started from a moment that I just love watching. When I was watching the raw material, we had a lot of interviews at events with RBG. A lot of them were pretty dry. You know, she was talking to law students mainly. We didn't know if we were gonna get that interview with her. It was scheduled for later in the edit. So we started editing the film as if we were never gonna get the interview, because you never know what's gonna happen. And then we had this kind of production footage of her going to other events as well. But when I was watching the raw material, I got to see the confirmation hearings that she had at the Senate. And there were 4 days of incredibly dry material of senators just talking and her responding to very specific legal questions. But there were moments in those 4 days of footage where she just came alive. And she came alive and responded to questions with kind of like an intensity that I hadn't seen in any of the other archival that we had of her. And then I saw Marty's face and that smile. And it's that response, it was just like, you know, and I had to watch it again, and I had to watch it again, and I looked at him, and just like, oh, it's just so great, and they love each other so much. And it's, you know, it's those jewels where, like, you can really see what they talk about in interviews. You can really see it in the footage. So, so I started editing that segment kind of around that moment, and that confirmation hearing became a central, you know, central material in the entire film, just because she had so much great energy in it. I don't know if you noticed all the audio edits, but that segment was put together from a lot of different interviews at events that she did, where she kind of repeated the same, you know, the same anecdote of meeting him, but it was just never like one great, you know, kind of narration of the story. So we had to like capture like different lines from different moments. And I really love the details of, you know, it wasn't just like, oh, I fell in love with this guy that loved my mind and, you know, probably thought I was cute. But, you know, really kind of telling a lot of texture of what was it like for a woman at that time in college, you know, with humor. But then you realize that it's only like, you know, one woman for 4 boys in college. I mean, the numbers were just crazy back then. But she does it with humor. Or the little line where she says that, like, the one thing about women in Cornell is that they had to hide how smart they were. So those moments are really telling within that love story. And, you know, picking up on what Bob talked about earlier, like now in my career, I'm at the moment where I do tell myself, like, okay, I've done this before, it will happen. And then right after that, I still say, like, but was I just lucky before? Or was, like, is it all, you know, I'm just a fake? Like, I still have that question mark when I start the process. And one of kind of the tricks that I do is, and I know that directors are also feeling like that, like they've been working on this, they have this vision, but they haven't seen anything that resembles to a finished film yet. So I always pick something that really jumped out at me, and then I do a very polished, you know, edit of that, just to kind of create trust in the process, you know, give them a sense that, like, there will be a finished film here, but also create trust within myself that, like, okay, I can pull it off as an editor, and we can pull it off as a collaboration, and, you know, material, come on, you can mold yourself to what we want you to be, you know? So yeah, it's definitely like I needed, like, we can do it moment in the process.
Oh, that's interesting, because I usually do it with the opening of the film. You know, if you feel like you're getting off on the right foot with the director, with the project, you know, with the character, everyone relaxes a little bit more. Yeah.
And then you can get really dirty and do things that are not gonna work, or like do things that feel really rough. Exactly. But you have kind of the room and the trust already built, a little bit of trust, and, you know, to do it.
Carla, a question about the structure of this emotional sort of spine of the film, her relationship with Marty. In rewatching the film, I was paying a lot of attention to it because I knew you were going to be talking about it. I guess we meet him and her. We meet him here, then we meet him again about 46 minutes in, and he's supporting her. And then about half an hour later, again, and then a little bit later, we find out he dies. But in my memory of my first experience watching the film, he was a much more present in the film than just those 4 moments. So I guess there's just noticing that, if you have anything to say about that, and then wondering if there was a lot of experimentation figuring out how to pace that and where to put those things, or did it just come chronologically and was it easy?
No, there was a lot. I mean, we had a lot of elements in the film. Like we jumped, there were moments where we saw her now going, like just a little moment with her, either talking to her granddaughter or going to the opera. So there were a lot of pieces, and then there were the historical pieces, there were legal pieces, we follow kind of a chronological order. But Marty kind of fell where we most needed him. Sometimes he made sense in the chronology of the history, but sometimes it was just kind of like an emotional moment we really needed. So it was a lot of moving pieces around to see how they work together. But there was towards the end of the film, he dies in 2010, and we had him telling the story of them meeting. But that was like a very conscious decision of not, using his voice when, for this segment, because it was all great material, but you kind of have to choose what you want to do. In the first segment, we wanted her to carry that story. It was her story of being a woman at that time. And then by the end of their story, it's like you really know him through her perspective. And then he dies, but then he tells us the story of how they met from his point of view. And it just made that moment of loss actually like harder. And his absence a lot more emotional. And she saw it at the premiere, and she started crying. I was kind of like behind her, so I saw her. She started crying when it was about his death, and then she started cracking up after, when he started telling that story again. And she's like, yes, we made her emotional, but then, she really remembered him. So that was a bit of a nice victory to see that.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to Bob, and Bob's going to tell us a little bit about Free Solo, and the title of the panel is Getting Your Audience's Attention, but Bob's going to talk a little bit about keeping your audience's attention. We always have to deal with transitions between scenes, sections of the film. How do we turn that corner and get into the next scene? So do you want to set up the film and the clip a little bit?
This is, Free Solo, I don't know how many people have seen it, but it deals with Alex Honnold, who is a climber, and he climbs free solo, which means without ropes or any safety equipment, and his dream is actually to climb El Capitan, which has never been done, and no other climber would even think of doing this. This clip is from the second act, kind of the middle of the film. The idea was that if you manage to grab your audience, and which is a very hard thing to do, you certainly don't want to lose them once you have them. And when you turn corners, it's easy for the audience to kind of fall off the wagon. And so this is in the middle of the film. We just went through a long climbing series with Alex working on a rope, practicing the 6 most critical spots. We've already met his girlfriend at the very beginning of the film, his new girlfriend, and the complications that ensued between him and his climbing. And we've already met the crew, which are elite climbers, but they're friends of his, and they have trepidations about doing this because they don't want to see their friend die. So the problem here was we have this scene of we've just gone through this long climbing sequence, and we have this scene where they're in the van together, Alex and Sonny, his girlfriend, and they're talking about she's talking about the relationship a little bit. And the next thing we had in the long version of the rough cut was a long climbing sequence again, this time with a kind of an old climber, a mentor of Alex's. And it went on for, 5 minutes, and they were talking about, all different aspects of climbing El Capitan, and this just wasn't going to play for the film. You just couldn't go into this detail. But this guy, this old climber, Peter Croft, was very important, not only for what he says in this scene when they have a discussion together in the van, which is the scene right after the clip you'll see, where he tells him that it's not such a good idea to film free soloing. So we had to get to that, and then he figures again prominently later. So we had to introduce this guy in the middle of the second act, which was a bit of a problem. And at the same time, we had to figure out how to get to him while trying to move the story along. So there's a few things here that we had to add rather than take away to accomplish that. So we can talk.
Putting these two things together, the relationship and then the comment that you can't have a relationship and be a climber at the same time, and then we see him climbing, and then we see him talking about it as if everything's fine, adds this psychological complexity that totally draws me in. And you do that many times in the film, and this is a great example of it.
Yeah, this is in the middle of Act 2, so it's dangerous territory in storytelling anyway. So it just felt like we needed to kind of find those moments that really made that very clear and strong. So that's kind of why we came up with this combination.
Well, we're heading towards the end of the panel, so I want to open it up with these last few minutes to questions the audience might have. Go ahead.
So, Katharine, were you afraid of using all your best shots in the opening, and where would you go from there?
Katharine, were you afraid of using all your best shots in the opening, and where would you go from there if that was the case?
That's a great question, because actually the directors shot a lot of the film, and they were learning how to shoot as they were making the film, so there was a lot of tough footage to work with. But we did have one of the husbands of the director, one of the two directors, is a professional cinematographer, and he shot a couple of days for us, and that was a lot of his footage, and he shot it on red. But I'd say that's part of grabbing the audience's attention, is playing to your best qualities, and those were some of the most beautiful shots, and they just seemed to fit there. A lot of them were solo skaters in an empty rink being shot, and they didn't seem to fit anywhere else, because for the rest of the film, we're really talking about what this world means to a community and what community spaces do for our society. And so you needed a packed rink rather than a soloist doing, if we were making a film about just skate styles, those would have been great shots. So in a way, a lot of our best footage was being underutilized. Was the most beautiful footage, that you could sit and watch for 2 hours, but it just didn't fit into the story. So it was kind of lucky, in a way, that we had those shots left on the cutting room floor, because those were the ones that we were able to use to construct the open. I don't know if that answers your question, but thank you.
Somebody else? I'm back there, sir, with a hat, I believe. Did everybody hear that? Good.
Yeah, I mean, it's really this trade-off between exposition and mystery that you're dealing with in the beginning of the film, and they're really diametrically opposed. So how do you achieve that balance is really tricky. I mean, it's the tendency is to tell you too much at the beginning, which we've talked about a little bit, and it's kind of like, how much do you need to know and when do you need to know it is kind of how you can decipher that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, when I say mystery, it doesn't have to be mysterioso kind of environment or shot. I mean, often just jumping into the action is a great way to start. We did a film called Valentino the Last Emperor, and the first scene was something I found that was way in the middle of three-quarters of the way through the shoot. There was just this fashion show that wasn't a very important fashion show, but it had all the characters in it, and it had a lot of action, and it was just fun, it was crazy, and a lot of interviews backstage where people were asking questions that we wanted to raise. for the rest of the film. So you felt like you were in the middle of it. You were trying to figure out where you were and what was going on, and you were also getting information at the same time, but it wasn't hitting you over the head with the information. So that tried to be a balance between kind of, not telling you too much, putting you in the middle of the action, and making you work a little at the same time. Is that? Yeah.
Can I just say something about? I find that confusion often comes when there's not much focused on what a scene has to be about, or when you're relying on a scene to tell you too much, even if it's verite or a sequence to tell you too much, and you get confused because you're trying to pay attention to too much content. So, and that that's applied to structure as well. Big picture, when, like you said, when are you saying things? It's okay to keep giving content or doing some exposition as you're farther along in the film, in the story.
Another question? Yes.
This is really for each of you. How early do you come in the storytelling process with the director? Do you usually come in when everything's been shot? How involved are you in the scripting process, or does it vary film to film? I'm just curious about sort of how early your creative vision for the edit is a part of the filmmaking.
Did everybody hear that? How early do you come onto the film? How early is your creative vision part of the filmmaking? I'm guessing it varies from project to project, or do you have certain rules for yourself for projects you come on? Like at a certain point, will you only start at the beginning, not the middle, or is it always different?
For me, it's always different. But generally, I come on when, usually at either at the beginning of post-production, or sometimes I've come on to, be a second editor or a finishing editor. There's only the film I'm on now, I was on before the director even shot, actually. We were finishing her first film, my director, Sarah Dosa, and we were at the mix, and we were walking to lunch, and Sarah was like, I think I'm going to start working on my next film. And I was like, oh my God, we just got here. How is that possible? And she goes, Erin, will you edit it? And I was like, I'm so tired. Aren't you tired? And I was like, of course, yes. And so that was really incredible and really fortunate for many reasons. But so because I was able to talk to her about the story and before she even went on her first shoot. And one of the challenges of this film is that some of our characters are invisible. And so we talked a lot about, just even being able to bring up the point, how do you shoot invisible characters, So from there, it was a really kind of helpful and meaningful intervention. So, really, the earlier you can bring in collaborators as filmmakers, the better, because, everybody brings something and has time to think about an approach and form a film.